He didn't even let me sit down before he shattered my entire world. The cafe buzzed with life around us, soft jazz floating from overhead speakers, the rich aroma of espresso and expensive pastries hanging thick in the air. I had barely taken 2 steps toward our usual table when Jason glanced up from his untouched cappuccino, and the words fell from his mouth like stones dropping into still water. "We need to talk." My stomach plummeted straight through the floor. I remember every detail of that moment with painful clarity, the way his voice sounded hollow, rehearsed, as if he'd practiced this speech a dozen times in front of his bathroom mirror. I lowered myself into the chair anyway, my palms already slick with nervous sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged animal desperate for escape. "What's going on?" I forced myself to ask, arranging my face into something resembling a smile. "Is this about the caterer situation?" He didn't answer my question. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket with deliberate slowness and placed a small velvet box on the table between us. But he wasn't giving it to me, he was taking something back, my engagement ring, the symbol of our future together. "I can't marry you, Emily, just like that." 7 words that carved through my chest sharper than any surgical scalpel I had ever wielded during my years as a nurse. 7 words that erased 3 years of memories, 16 days of wedding preparations, and every dream I had foolishly allowed myself to believe in. "What?" I whispered, the single syllable barely escaping my constricted throat. Jason leaned back in his chair, and I watched something shift in his expression, relief, perhaps, as if the weight of honesty had finally set him free from some invisible burden. "It's not you," he said, though everything about his posture suggested otherwise. "It's just. We're heading in different directions now. I've made connections recently, important ones. Megan Langley and I were aligned in ways I never anticipated." Megan Langley, the name hit me like a physical blow, daughter of Gregory Langley, the venture capitalist whose influence stretched across half the West Coast's technology sector. The woman whose family name opened doors that people like me didn't even know existed. My heart began racing, blood pounding in my ears. "You're leaving me for her." "It's not like that," he said, though it was exactly like that, and we both knew it. "This arrangement is better for both of us, Emily. Really, you deserve someone, simpler, someone who fits your world." He didn't even flinch when I stared at him, stunned into absolute silence, desperately trying to comprehend how the man I was supposed to marry in just 16 days could erase me from his life so completely, so cleanly, as if I were nothing more than an inconvenient line item on a spreadsheet. Then, as if he hadn't already gutted me completely, he gestured toward the ring box and added, "Also the ring. It's a family heirloom passed down through 4 generations. My grandmother would be absolutely devastated if it left the family." I slipped it off. My hands trembled violently, but I managed. I placed the ring gently on the table between us, positioning it with careful precision, and said the only words I could summon, "Thank you for your honesty." Then I rose from my chair and walked away, straight past the glass doors, past the couple sharing chocolate desserts without a care in the world, past the curious eyes of strangers trying to piece together what drama had just unfolded at the corner table. Only when I turned onto Elm Street, safely out of sight, did the tears finally come, hot and relentless, streaming down my cheeks like rivers breaking through a dam. I didn't return to the apartment we had shared. I couldn't face the half-packed moving boxes, the wedding dress hanging in the closet like a ghost of futures past, the overwhelming silence that would swallow me whole. But when I finally gathered enough courage to retrieve my belongings, I discovered it had already been handled. My possessions sat in labeled suitcases by the door. Clothing, books, toiletries, photographs, all carefully sorted and organized as if I were a package being returned to sender. Not by Jason, of course. He wouldn't have been that considerate or efficient. It had to be his mother, the woman who had never quite approved of her son marrying a foster kid with no family name to speak of. I sat on the cold hallway floor beside those bags for hours, maybe longer. Time had ceased to hold meaning. My old studio apartment lease had ended weeks ago. I had gladly surrendered it to a struggling nursing student, so certain was I of my new life with Jason. Every penny I had saved over years of careful budgeting had gone toward the wedding. I had less than $100 remaining in my bank account and a full week until my next hospital paycheck. That's when I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I swallowed my pride and called my foster mother. Margaret Temple answered on the 3rd ring, her voice warm and steady as it had always been throughout my chaotic childhood. "Emily, honey, where have you been hiding? I was just about to call you about those shoes we looked at last week for the ceremony." I couldn't even form words. A sob escaped instead, raw and broken. That was all it took. An hour later, I found myself curled on her faded plaid couch, fingers wrapped around a steaming mug of peppermint tea while she smoothed my hair with gentle hands, the same way she used to comfort me when I was 13 years old, freshly broken from yet another foster placement gone horribly wrong. Margaret didn't press for explanations. She simply draped a thick knitted blanket over my legs and said, "Stay as long as you need, sweetheart. You hear me? I've got plenty of space and you've got absolutely nothing to prove. Not to me, not to anyone." That night sleep refused to come. I lay on the old pull-out bed in her living room, staring at the water-stained ceiling, replaying every excruciating detail of Jason's calculated performance, his unsettling calmness. The way he hadn't hesitated or stumbled over his carefully chosen words. Had he ever truly loved me, or had I merely been a convenient placeholder until someone with a last name like Langley entered his orbit? By sunrise, the sharp ache had transformed into something heavier, something that settled in my bones like concrete shame. I was supposed to be walking confidently into a new chapter of my life, building a family of my own for the first time ever. Instead, I had landed right back where I started, 28 years old, heartbroken, essentially homeless, completely humiliated. At noon I showered, dressed in clean scrubs, and returned to the hospital as if nothing catastrophic had occurred. Fellow nurses smiled warmly and asked about wedding preparations. I smiled back, nodded along, lied through my teeth, because speaking the truth felt like it would tear me open all over again, exposing wounds too fresh to bear examination. But as I changed into my work attire and reviewed patient assignments for my shift, one certainty crystallized in my mind: I couldn't remain here forever. Not in this small town where everyone knew everyone's business, not surrounded by these haunting memories, not while Jason Miller and Megan Langley toasted champagne to their perfectly aligned future just across the state border. I had nowhere else to go and absolutely nothing left to lose. Sometimes that combination creates the most dangerous kind of freedom. 3 days crawled past, 3 slow, aching days where I moved through hospital routines on autopilot while struggling to keep my internal world from completely unraveling. I smiled when colleagues inquired about the wedding. I explained it had been postponed due to unforeseen circumstances. I mentioned Jason had an urgent business trip. I claimed everything was perfectly fine. I lied far too much and fooled absolutely no one. On the third afternoon, while I was checking IV lines for a patient in room 8, Rachel appeared in the doorway, our blunt, no-nonsense charge nurse whose directness I had always appreciated, even when it stung. "Hey," she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "You still looking for a miracle escape from this place?" I blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" She motioned me into the hallway and glanced around before speaking. "You remember Lily from the neurology department. She took a private care position about a month ago. Live-in arrangement, incredible pay, the whole package, but she quit last week, couldn't handle the patient." "What's wrong with him?" Rachel raised an eyebrow, a hint of dark amusement crossing her features. "Some wealthy tech mogul, paralyzed in an accident, lives up in Cypress Hill in one of those ridiculous mansions that makes you wonder who even builds such places. Apparently he's an absolute nightmare. Drove away 3 nurses before Lily lasted 2 weeks. Sounds amazing," I replied dryly. "Pays triple our current salary," she continued, ignoring my sarcasm. "Live-in suite with private bathroom, all meals included, no roommates, no night shift rotations, just one patient requiring round-the-clock attention." I hesitated, something stirring beneath my exhaustion. "I'm not trained as a private caregiver, Rachel," she scoffed. "You're a registered nurse with 5 years of intensive experience. You're more qualified than 90% of the candidates they've interviewed, and honestly, this guy apparently scares everyone off within 2 weeks." She studied my face. "You're stubborn, Emily. That might actually work in your favor here." I almost laughed. I wasn't certain what part of me still qualified as stubborn. Everything inside felt cracked and fragile, held together by nothing but habit and obligation. But something in her words, that single word, escape, echoed loudly in the hollow chamber of my chest. "Do you have contact information?" 10 minutes later, she pressed a small business card into my palm. The name was printed in sharp, elegant cursive: Margaret Temple, estate manager. Beneath it, a phone number. Midnight arrived before I summoned enough courage to dial. I stood shivering in the back alley behind my foster mother's house, coat wrapped tight against the biting Montana wind, phone trembling in my hand. The estate manager answered on the second ring, her voice clipped and professional. "Temple Residence. Yes, hello, this is Emily Carter. I was informed there's an open position for a live-in nurse." A pause stretched across the line. Then, "Are you available for an interview tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp?" I blinked, startled by the speed. "Yes, absolutely, I can arrange that. Bring your credentials and professional references. The address will be texted momentarily. Do not be late." The line went dead without pleasantries. At 4:30 the following morning, I boarded the earliest flight departing Helena, connecting through San Francisco before catching a regional shuttle that climbed winding roads into the Cypress Hill region until civilization seemed to fall away entirely. Everything felt surreal, dreamlike, as if I had stumbled into someone else's story, a life I hadn't earned and didn't deserve. And then I saw the house. It emerged from the landscape like a modern fortress, all glass and steel and impossibly sharp angles woven seamlessly into the cliffside, as if some architect had carved a mansion directly from sunlight and ancient stone. A long black gate swung open silently as my taxi approached, and for one desperate moment I wanted to tell the driver to turn around immediately. Too late for retreat now. Margaret Temple met me at the towering front entrance. A woman in her 60s, thin as wire and twice as sharp, silver hair pulled into a severe twist, wearing a dark blue suit without a single visible wrinkle. She examined me with the precision of someone who had spent decades in either military service or hospital administration. "You're early," she observed. "I didn't want to risk being late. Good instinct, follow me." The interview proceeded with surgical efficiency. She reviewed my credentials, asked exactly 4 questions, never once allowed her expression to soften, and finally announced, "The position is yours, Miss Carter, should you choose to accept." She slid a thick folder across the polished desk. "The terms are straightforward, round-the-clock availability with minimal exceptions, 2 days off per calendar month, no personal visitors on the premises, extensive medical knowledge is essential, absolute discretion is non-negotiable." She paused, ensuring I absorbed each word. "Your patient is a complicated man, demanding, difficult. You will reside on the 2nd floor in a suite adjacent to his quarters. Meals and lodging are included. Salary is $12,000 monthly, plus performance bonuses depending on the patient's condition and progression." I gripped the armrest to prevent myself from laughing out loud. The figure was more than triple my hospital income, more than I had ever imagined earning. I didn't have a backup plan. I possessed nothing except an overstuffed duffel bag and a bleeding heart, but I said yes. I said it without a moment's hesitation. Margaret nodded, unsurprised. "Your patient is Mr. Ryan Hale." The name meant absolutely nothing to me then. Within weeks, it would mean everything. The next morning, I stood outside his door, folder clutched against my chest, heart hammering so loudly I was certain he could hear it through the walls. The hallway was unnaturally silent, hushed by the kind of plush carpet that swallowed footsteps whole. Everything about this house felt polished and cold: stone floors, sleek contemporary lines, expensive silence that pressed against my eardrums. Margaret positioned herself beside me, clipboard pressed to her chest like armor. "You're absolutely certain you want this? I signed the contract." "That's not what I asked." I swallowed hard. "Yes, I'm certain." She knocked twice, then pushed the door open without waiting for a response. The room was massive, too large for one person, designed to impress rather than comfort. Vaulted ceilings soared overhead, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked an endless stretch of ancient redwood trees, morning sunlight bleeding across pale hardwood floors. It felt less like a bedroom and more like a throne room constructed for someone who had already surrendered their crown. He was positioned by the windows in a sleek black wheelchair, his back to us. "Mr. Hale," Margaret announced crisply, "your new nurse has arrived, Emily Carter." He didn't turn immediately. He simply sat there, fingers slowly tapping the armrest in a rhythm that might have been contemplation or irritation or both. Finally, he pivoted and my breath caught sharply in my throat. I don't know what I had expected. An older man, perhaps, someone frail and diminished. But Ryan Hale was young, mid-30s at most, tall even while seated, with close-cropped dark hair, a sharp jawline, and eyes like cut glass that seemed to evaluate everything and everyone with cold precision. Yet beneath the handsome exterior, exhaustion radiated from him in waves. His skin was too pale, his frame too lean, his shoulders hunched with invisible weight, but his expression, that was what truly warned me. He looked at me like I was already disappointing him before I had spoken a single word. "So," he said, his voice low and laced with bitter amusement, "they sent me another one." I opened my mouth to introduce myself properly, but he cut me off with a dismissive wave. "What's the betting pool this time, Margaret?" 1 week, 10 days before she runs screaming. Margaret didn't dignify the question with a response. She merely said, "I'll leave you two to become acquainted," and departed, pulling the heavy door shut behind her. Silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. "I'm not here to participate in any betting pools," I finally said, keeping my voice level and professional. "Just to do my job." He rolled his wheelchair several feet closer, examining me the way someone might study a piece of art they found thoroughly unimpressive. "And what exactly do you believe that job entails?" "Medication management, physical therapy coordination, monitoring vital signs, supporting your rehabilitation process." He snorted derisively. "You forgot the part where you nod sympathetically while I fail repeatedly to walk again. That's usually everyone's favorite performance piece." I didn't flinch. "I'm not here to offer pity." He tilted his head slightly, something shifting in his expression, surprise perhaps, or the faintest flicker of curiosity. "Oh, that's refreshingly different. Most of them crack completely by day 3, sometimes sooner. Maybe I'll surprise you." "Maybe," he conceded, though the smirk curling at the edge of his mouth made clear he didn't believe a single word of it. "We shall see." We navigated that first day in stiff, uncomfortable silence. I administered his medications precisely on schedule, reviewed his physical therapy protocols in detail, documented observations carefully in his charts. Ryan peppered me with barbed comments throughout, testing my reactions, pushing against my professional composure, searching for cracks in my armor. I refused to give him the satisfaction. I had worked with combat veterans who had lost limbs to IEDs. I had comforted teenagers who screamed through every injection. I had held the hands of dying mothers who wept through morphine hazes. Ryan Hale, with all his wealth and bitterness and sharp tongue, was not going to intimidate me into surrender. That evening, as I prepared his room for the night, he spoke suddenly, his voice different, softer, less weaponized. "You're not what I expected." I glanced up from organizing the medication drawer. No, you haven't asked about the accident. Everyone asks about the accident, usually within the first hour." I returned to my task, keeping my movements calm and unhurried. I figured you'd share that information if and when you wanted to. Another pause, another surprised silence. It was a skiing accident, he offered finally, the words emerging slowly, reluctantly. Solo trip, I lost control on an expert ridge run, hit a tree, woke up in a medical helicopter, haven't stood unassisted since. I nodded, offering no platitudes, no hollow expressions of sympathy. Thank you for telling me. He studied me for an uncomfortably long moment, his sharp gaze searching for something I couldn't identify. Why did you accept this position? The truth. I needed it. Not the money, why this specific job? I met his eyes directly, refusing to look away. Because I've recently been lied to by someone I trusted completely. Because I know intimately what it feels like to be discarded, thrown away like something broken and worthless. His expression shifted just for a fraction of a second, a crack appearing in walls that seemed impenetrable. Then he turned back toward the windows, dismissing me with his silence. Don't get attached, he said quietly. I don't do gratitude, I don't do friendship, I don't do any of that. Good, I replied, gathering my supplies, I don't do illusions. He didn't respond to that, but he didn't order me to leave either. It happened on the 5th night of my employment. I wasn't supposed to be awake at that hour, but the wind had been howling since midnight, rattling the mansion's windows like some restless spirit couldn't decide whether to force its way inside or remain forever outside. I rose to adjust the blinds and noticed light still glowing in the West Wing gymnasium, a restricted area Ryan rarely permitted anyone to enter unaccompanied. Initially, I ignored it. Perhaps he had simply fallen asleep in there watching television or reviewing business documents, but something tugged at my instincts, quiet and persistent, refusing to be dismissed. I pulled on my sweater, padded silently down the shadowy hallway, and pushed the gymnasium door open just wide enough to peer through. What I witnessed stopped everything. Ryan Hale was standing. Not completely upright, not unassisted. He gripped a pair of parallel rehabilitation bars, his arms rigid with strain, sweat streaming down his temples, but he was doing it. His legs trembled beneath him, every muscle visibly taut with effort. Slowly, determinedly, agonizingly, he forced himself forward step by painstaking step, my breath caught in my throat. He hadn't noticed me initially, too consumed by concentration and pain. But the soft creak of the door gave away my presence. He turned sharply, and his expression transformed instantly from focused effort to pure rage. What the hell are you doing here? He snarled. I heard something, I managed. I thought there might be a problem. Get out now. I didn't move, not because fear paralyzed me, but because something in my chest had already shifted irrevocably. He wasn't hopeless. He wasn't finished, wasn't giving up as he pretended daily. He was hiding his progress, but why? Why are you keeping this a secret? I asked softly, ignoring his command. His hands clenched tighter around the bars, knuckles white with tension. Because the moment people witness progress, they immediately expect miracles. That's not how any of this works. That's not an answer. He laughed, but the sound was bitter, hollow. No, but it's how disappointment operates. I've already watched people walk away once they realized I wasn't going to magically rise from this chair and become exactly who I was before. I'm not enduring that betrayal again. So instead, you pretend there's nothing left inside you, that you've surrendered completely. His jaw tightened dangerously. You don't understand anything. I stepped closer, moving carefully the way one approaches a wounded animal. Maybe I understand more than you think. His eyes locked onto mine, furious, uncertain, something vulnerable flickering beneath the anger. I'm not going to tell anyone, I said firmly, but if you allow me to genuinely help you, really help, not just go through professional motions, we can work towards something meaningful. You don't have to fight this battle alone. Why? He demanded. Why would you possibly care? Because I know exactly what it feels like to have your entire future ripped away from you and then be expected to smile through the wreckage. He stared at me, breathing hard, sweat gleaming on his skin in the dim light. I fully expected him to yell again, order me out, threaten immediate termination. Instead, he slowly lowered himself back into the wheelchair, silent and exhausted. Finally, he muttered, "Fine," my heart leapt. "We keep this strictly between us," he added, his voice hardening again. No one, absolutely no one knows, not Margaret, not the staff, not my business associates. I understand completely. And you follow my lead. I say stop, we stop immediately. I say push harder, you help me push. That's the arrangement. Agreed. He studied me for a long, searching moment, something shifting in his expression. You're genuinely not like the others. I shrugged. I'm not trying to be. Our secret sessions began the following morning, early, quiet, before Margaret stirred, before sunlight fully warmed the kitchen tiles. Each step Ryan managed was visible agony, controlled and measured, like fighting gravity itself, armed with nothing but determination and muscle memory. But he did it. Step after impossible step, he did it, and I was there beside him. Not to offer empty encouragement, not to weep with sympathy, just to support him, one steady hand ready if he started to fall. It started with a voice I didn't recognize. I was organizing the medication cabinet in my suite when I heard it, deep, confident, too polished. Male, definitely not Ryan, definitely not any staff member I had encountered. Curiosity pulled me toward the main hallway, following the sound into the west sitting room. There, lounging casually on the expensive leather couch, was a man in his early 40s, expensive watch glinting in the morning light, holding a glass of something considerably stronger than orange juice. "Ryan, my friend, you look absolutely terrible," the man laughed, seemingly unbothered by his own rudeness. Ryan, seated across from him, offered a tight, humorless smile. "Good to see you too, Eric." This was my introduction to Eric Thorne, Ryan's longtime business partner, the man who, according to Margaret's careful briefings, had assumed management of Hale Nexus Technologies following Ryan's devastating accident. Something about him immediately made my skin crawl. Perhaps it was the way he looked at Ryan, measuring, calculating, as if constantly evaluating his business partner's remaining worth. Or perhaps it was how his gaze landed on me when I entered with the tea tray, slow, assessing, invasive. "This the new one?" Eric asked, gesturing carelessly in my direction. "Emily Carter," I said evenly, setting down the tray without making eye contact. "She any better than the last three who ran away crying?" "She's not here to entertain you," Ryan replied, his voice suddenly cold and sharp. "She's my nurse, nothing more requires your attention." The conversation quickly shifted to business matters, pending mergers, investor tensions, government contracts requiring signatures. I tried to remain invisible, retreating to the corner of the room, but one word froze me completely where I stood. "Langley." Eric leaned forward, lowering his voice to what he clearly believed was a conspiratorial whisper. "Laura says her father's ready to push the investment funds through immediately. We just need the control package transferred to the shell company. Langley Capital will absorb everything seamlessly. Gregory has contacts throughout the Technology Oversight Board. Easy approval." Ryan didn't respond, he simply stared out the window, his knuckles white against the wheelchair's armrest. "I've already prepared the documentation," Eric continued eagerly. "We just need your signature to finalize everything." "Later," Ryan said flatly. "I'll review the documents thoroughly first. You've been saying that for weeks now. If we delay much longer, this opportunity closes permanently." Ryan offered no further response. My pulse thundered in my ears as the implications crashed over me like a cold wave. I slipped quietly from the room before either man noticed I was still present. Langley, Laura Langley, that name haunted me still, connected irrevocably to my devastation, and then the pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Langley Capital, Laura's involvement, Eric's aggressive push for Ryan's signature. The shell company designed to absorb control. They were attempting to steal his company, strip ownership while Ryan was still recovering, vulnerable, distracted by his medical challenges. And if Laura Langley was involved, Megan Langley couldn't possibly be far behind. My chest constricted painfully as I retreated to my room, closing the door firmly behind me. Was this somehow connected to what had happened to me? Was I merely an innocent bystander caught in the crossfire of something far larger and more sinister? Or the thought chilled me to my core, had they specifically chosen me for this position because I was the foster girl nobody would ever suspect? The discarded fiancé with no connections, no influence, no one who would believe her warnings. That night I couldn't contain what I had overheard. As I assisted Ryan through his stretching exercises during our secret session, I shattered our comfortable silence. "There's something you need to know, something I overheard today regarding your company." He didn't look at me, continuing his movements. "Speak." I told him everything I had heard verbatim. Names, specific phrases, Eric's urgent tone, the mention of shell companies and transferred control. I even mentioned Megan Langley and my personal connection to that family. At that revelation, he paused his exercise completely. "You know the Langleys. My ex-fiancé left me for Megan Langley 16 days before our wedding." He blinked slowly, processing this information. "Jason Miller," I nodded, surprised. "You know him?" "No, but I've encountered the name through Eric's correspondence. He's apparently connected to several of their investment ventures." He rolled his chair backward from the parallel bars, facing me directly. "Are you suggesting that my business partner and your former fiancé are somehow collaborating on something together?" "I'm suggesting this constellation of coincidences is far too convenient to be accidental." He fell silent for an extended moment, clearly weighing my words against years of partnership and trust. Finally, "I'll review the documentation Eric has been pressuring me to sign." That was all. I tried not to feel crushed by his measured response. I had hoped for immediate belief, for decisive action. Instead, Ryan retreated into contemplation, like everything I had revealed had disappeared into some internal void requiring lengthy analysis. That night I paced my small suite like a caged animal. Was my suspicion misplaced? Was I conjuring shadows from personal trauma? Or worse, was I absolutely correct, and no one with power would believe the warning from a nobody nurse with a grudge? The following morning he knocked on my door. Ryan never knocked. When I opened it, he sat in his wheelchair with a thick folder balanced on his lap, his expression grim. "You were right," my breath caught. "Langley Capital isn't simply investing in Hale Nexus Technologies," he continued. "The paperwork Eric prepared transfers decision-making authority and majority ownership to a holding company he established secretly 2 months ago, hidden under multiple legal layers I nearly missed." "Oh my God," his jaw tightened. "I want you to help me stop them." He extended the folder toward me. "Everything I've gathered so far is inside." Financial trails, forged authorizations, timeline inconsistencies. I accepted it with trembling hands. Are you certain about this after everything you've invested in that partnership? Ryan nodded slowly, something hardening in his expression. If they believe I'm too weak and broken to fight back, then they've forgotten who I was before the accident, and they're about to receive a very painful reminder. The plan required days of careful coordination. Every night after the staff retired and darkness settled over the estate, Ryan and I sat across from each other at the long oak table in his private study, reviewing documents and refining strategy. His hands sometimes trembled from exhaustion, but his voice remained steady, commanding, increasingly fierce. He was building a war room piece by piece, and I was his only trusted ally inside these walls. He had already contacted his personal attorney, who was quietly gathering additional evidence: emails, contracts, bank transaction records, communication logs. Ryan concealed nothing from me throughout this process, including his moments of doubt and pain. I trusted Eric more than almost anyone in my life, he confessed one night, his voice heavy with betrayal. He was present the day I pitched my very first application concept. When I couldn't walk anymore, I let him speak on my behalf, represent my interests, and this entire time. You were right to trust your instincts eventually, I offered gently. That's what matters now. I was late recognizing the deception, he countered, but I won't be late acting on it again. 1 week later, a special board meeting was formally convened. No one suspected anything unusual. Ryan had allowed Eric to believe the long-awaited signature was finally forthcoming. He had even sent a cordial email thanking his partner for handling matters so competently during his recovery. That same afternoon, Ryan dressed in a full tailored suit for the first time since his accident, midnight blue, impeccably fitted. He looked handsome in a way that made my heart slow unexpectedly. His body remained weak, still healing, but something about the way he carried himself, proud, determined, preparing for battle, transformed the very air around him. He practiced walking to the conference table with his cane, 10 steps, then 15, then 20, each one deliberate, painful, necessary. I want them to witness this with their own eyes, he said, his voice steel. I want them to remember this moment forever. The day of the confrontation, we arrived 15 minutes early. The corporate headquarters building was all glass and chrome and intimidating silence. Heads turned as we entered together, Ryan walking beside me with measured steps, jaw set, cane barely necessary anymore. Shock rippled visibly through the hallways like electrical current. In the boardroom, Eric occupied the head of the table as if he already owned everything. Laura Langley sat nearby in a dove-gray suit, legs crossed elegantly, lips painted crimson like preparation for war, and beside her, my breath caught, sat Jason. He appeared smaller than I remembered. Still handsome, still carrying that smug confidence, but somehow diminished, like something borrowed that had never been properly returned. When Ryan stepped into the room, walking on his own power, the assembled executives fell absolutely silent. You're walking, Eric managed, his composure cracking. Not perfectly yet, Ryan replied calmly, but sufficiently. He didn't proceed to the far end of the table as expected. Instead, he walked directly to the head position, paused inches from Eric, and looked his former partner directly in the eyes. This meeting is now under my authority, he announced, his voice carrying throughout the room, and I will begin with this. He placed a substantial folder on the table and methodically revealed every piece of evidence: forged documentation, backdoor legal clauses, proof of Eric's systematic attempt to transfer control of Hale Nexus Technologies to a private shell company ultimately owned by Langley Capital. Laura's expression remained frozen, betraying nothing. Jason shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze entirely. Eric's face slowly drained of all color. You cannot prove intent, Eric sputtered desperately. I don't need to prove intent, Ryan replied, his voice dangerously soft. I only need to prove breach of fiduciary duty, which I have just done comprehensively. The board members stirred, murmuring among themselves. The general counsel rose from his seat. Mr. Hale, would you like to formally request an immediate vote of no confidence in Mr. Thorne's position? I would, Ryan confirmed. Effective immediately, chaos erupted. Laura stood first, her heels clicking against the floor like gunshots as she gathered her belongings. You have no idea who you're challenging, Ryan. My father, I know exactly who I'm challenging, he interrupted calmly. A woman who hides behind her father's reputation and influence, and a man, his gaze shifted to Jason, who sells out everything meaningful for a convenient shortcut. Laura scoffed dismissively. And what about your nurse? Is she your strategic advisor now, your co-founder perhaps? Ryan turned to look at me, really looked, with something warm and genuine softening his features. She's the reason I'm standing here at all. Jason looked away, unable to meet my eyes. The board voted. It was unanimous. Eric Thorne was immediately removed from all positions. The fraudulent contracts were nullified. Full control reverted to Ryan Hale. When the room finally cleared and silence settled over the empty conference table, Ryan and I remained alone. He leaned heavily on his cane, breathing hard from exertion and adrenaline, but his eyes shone with something I hadn't witnessed before: genuine hope. You did it, I whispered, emotion threatening to overwhelm me. No, he corrected gently. We did. and then just for a moment he smiled wide, full, absolutely real. I realized something I hadn't permitted myself to believe until that precise moment. He wasn't the only one who had taken their first steps toward a new life that day. Weeks passed, and the mansion no longer felt like a mausoleum for broken dreams. The windows stood open more frequently now, welcoming fresh air and possibility. Light poured into hallways that had once felt oppressive, and even the neglected garden, previously dry and overgrown, breathed with new life. Ryan still experienced difficult days. He still limped occasionally, still braced himself against unexpected pain. But the bitterness that had trailed behind his every movement began to lift gradually, like morning fog burning away under persistent sunshine. So did mine. The wedding that never happened, I stopped mourning its loss. The name I had almost taken, I released it completely. Slowly, I began perceiving myself as more than someone who had been cruelly discarded. I started reading again, finding joy in stories. I ran short laps on the private trail winding behind the estate. I laughed, genuinely laughed, without guilt weighing down each moment of happiness. Ryan insisted on cooking dinner one night each week, despite burning rice consistently and cursing at the stove as if the appliance owed him a personal apology. I let him struggle through it. I perched on a kitchen island stool, legs curled beneath me, smiling at his frustration and creative profanity. That became our ritual, small and unspoken, but entirely ours. One evening he handed me a dish I genuinely couldn't identify and said with mock solemnity, "If this kills you, I want it officially recorded that you volunteered." I took a cautious bite. "You'll get the company and my will as compensation." He paused, something shifting in his expression. "Actually, no," I glanced up, confused. "I transferred majority ownership to a trust," he explained quietly. "One that includes you." I set down my fork, staring. "What?" "I'm not giving you the company outright," he clarified gently, "but I want you to understand something. I've built something more meaningful with you than I ever accomplished with anyone else in my life, and I want you involved in whatever comes next." I continued staring, speechless. He reached slowly into his pocket and withdrew a small black velvet box. "Before you say anything," he said quickly, nervousness coloring his voice for the first time, "you don't have to answer immediately. Not today, not even this year. I know I'm still learning how to be a complete person again. I know you didn't sign up for any of this when you took this job." He opened the box carefully. Inside rested a ring, simple gold band, one small sapphire gleaming in the center. "But I wanted to ask anyway," he continued, his voice dropping low and sincere. "Will you consider walking this road with me, not because I need saving, but because with you I remember who I actually am?" I didn't cry. I had expected tears might come, but instead I felt something different, something steady and certain. A sense of arrival, like I had finally walked through the darkest stretch of forest and discovered not a castle but a clearing, a quiet, peaceful place to simply breathe again. I took the ring, slid it slowly onto my finger. "I'm not saying yes," I whispered, smiling through the emotion, "but I'm definitely not saying no." He laughed, genuinely, joyfully. "That sounds exactly like something you would say." We didn't rush toward anything. There were no grand announcements, no headlines, no social media declarations, just more mornings together, more progress, more healing. He walked half a mile completely unassisted the following month. I passed my certification examination to establish my own private medical practice. We hired additional staff together. I remained living in the mansion, but it no longer felt like his space alone. It felt like ours. As for Jason, he texted once, months later. 2 brief lines asking if I was okay, if I needed anything. I never replied. I didn't need to. The truth was I had already received everything that heartbreak was meant to teach me. A painful lesson, a necessary detour, and ultimately a doorway into a life I hadn't even dared to imagine possible. Ryan stopped using the wheelchair entirely by autumn. On his birthday, we took a short trip together up the coast, just the two of us. He walked beside me along the beach at sunset, sand clinging to our bare feet, the wind cold enough to sting our cheeks. At one point he paused, gazing out over the endless gray-green ocean, and asked quietly, "Do you think we'll ever return to who we were before all of this?" I shook my head slowly. "I hope not." He turned to face me, and I continued, "Because who we've become is infinitely better." He didn't respond with words. He simply reached for my hand, intertwining our fingers together, and he didn't let go.